Hello and welcome to another edition of the C Squared podcast. This is your host Curtis with my co-host Aaliyah, and today we are back with Mr. Belgian Jasper, who is here to talk with us today for the third or fourth time. I don't remember now, but he's back, and he's going to talk to us about going to shows since restrictions have pretty much eased up, I think, pretty much everywhere in the world. So he's located in Toronto, basically same as me, and we've had no restrictions, I think, for the last month approximately. He's also been to Europe to attend a festival, and he's also been to the United States in the past week, so he's got some good perspectives to offer on this, and we're going to be talking in depth. And to start off, I'm going to pass it over to Aaliyah to get the ball rolling.
Well, that was pretty solid setup there. Thanks for coming on the show again, Jasper.
My pleasure.
So if you were to maybe describe the differences now between going to shows before the pandemic hit and going to shows now, what are some of the most dramatic differences that you notice?
I don't know if it's like one thing that I can put my finger on necessarily, but I mean, it's kind of funny how like your brain is wired now to you try it's funny, you go to a metal show and keep social distancing and masking up is difficult at a metal show, and for people that still feel more comfortable wearing a mask, I'll usually go to a show with a mask on. Then you have your first drink, so you take your mask off for the drink, and then all of a sudden you find yourself in a pit and it's like you don't remember anymore if you had a mask on or not until somebody accidentally pulls your mask off. It's just funny. Like I went to Judas Priest a week ago, 2 weeks ago, with a couple of buddies, and I realized that I was in the stands with a beer in my hand, not with a mask on, but then I put my mask on to go into the washroom where there was absolutely nobody, and then I took my mask back off in the hallway, put it back on to go. Like it's just like it feels like every time you walk through a door, you have this reaction now that, oh, I have to do something, and it's funny that it's still kind of like subconsciously in there. Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, few shows are selling out. There are definitely shows that are sold out. Festivals. I was at Hell's Heroes last weekend in Houston, Texas. That was sold out. Maybe the United States slightly a little different. I think that the states in general are a little bit more liberal when it comes to taking care of each other. I know for a fact that in Europe and also in Canada, like it's been tough getting people to go back, and I fully understand that. I was somebody that have taken all the restrictions very seriously. I eventually ended up getting COVID once the shows opened up again, and that likely has something to do with that. Fully vaccinated, boosted, knocked me off my feet for a few days, but nothing serious. I understand a lot of people are still kind of like, oh, I'm gonna wait and see. I'm gonna wait a little bit more. A lot of people have pre-existing conditions and stuff like that, and don't necessarily go from staying in your bubble and doing all the right things to going, okay, now I'm going to go hang out with 5,000 people. So that mentality is definitely there. From my perspective, not only is going to a show one of my favorite things in the world, so I really couldn't wait to go back. I'm trying to be somewhat smart about what I do, but at the end of the day, it's kind of like you either go or you don't go. Even with masks on, putting a couple of hundred sweaty people in a small room together is not a way to stop a virus. So I would say I really hope that people that still haven't gotten the vaccine, which are few of us here or not of us, sorry, I'm vaccinated, but in Ontario, I think we are pretty, we're pretty damn good. I think there's less than 8% or less than 7% now that haven't had full vaccination. I kind of hope that just stay home then. If you want to enjoy those things, get that vaccine, and also support the bands, because now that shows are coming back, shows are extremely expensive investments for bands to make, like these tours, especially when European bands come to the States or Canada, North American bands go to Europe. That's a big investment, and if halfway through that show somebody gets sick, the show's over. Like there's they don't wait for a few days somewhere, and like it's too expensive. So if you want to go to a show, buy merchandise, support these bands, because now is the moment that some of these labels, bands might actually survive if the fans show up. So I think people are very cautious. I think that's the biggest difference. Every other show before COVID in Toronto, especially in like medium-sized clubs, they're all sold out. And you get there at 5 o'clock and the line goes beyond the block for people wanting to be there early. Now people, shows are maybe full for like 50-70%. People show up just for the band they want to see, they head out again. I think that's something that I've seen as a bit of a change here, at least here in in Toronto.
And so, do you feel like quite a lot is actually the same as before?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's I don't know if there's gonna be maybe certain things that will never change in society. Like I think there will always be situations that I will wear a mask. Like I definitely have changed the way that I do my day job. Like I'm way less in my office now that people are starting to go back. I'm much more smart about those things. But when it comes to entertainment, when you actually go to the show, I think that it's not that much of a difference. I mean, as somebody that wants to also go to a show to like interview bands, that's very different right now. So for example, again, different in the States where people are a little bit more, less cautious maybe, but here in Canada,
You can
like
call
so,
us reckless. It's okay.
well, hey, I have some funny stories about the festival last week. I'll tell you that, but we'll see if we get to that. But for example, tomorrow, as we're recording this, I don't know when this will go live, but tomorrow on Sunday, May 1st, Destruction and Nervosa will be playing Toronto. And if all goes according to plan, I will do my first in Canada in person at a show interviews again, but have to be fully vaccinated, still have to wear a mask, have to provide a negative test in the last 24 hours, stuff like that. So where before, or in some other areas, there's press is allowed to roam a little bit more freely, if you will. There's more access to people. And I think that right now people are still very careful of that. And again, that ties back to that investment that people made, like this particular package, a German and a Brazilian band, this is their third show of the tour. If they're a little reckless right now and they let, just anybody in, one of them gets COVID, this whole tour is over, and they've made a massive investment that maybe a band like Destruction could recover from. But the average band, that's a financial disaster, right? So anyway.
I had a question. Who put the restrictions there? Because we don't have that in Ontario at all. So just curious about that. Was that the band?
I think so. I mean, obviously got those restriction notifications through the label, or in some cases through the tour management and what have you. But so yeah, I guess it's the tour manager that makes those calls on behalf of the band. I mean, we're right now in Ontario, yeah, we don't have like enforced provincial restrictions, but a lot of stores still also say like, hey, if you want to come to my store, put a mask on, like, so it's up to them. And I think that we just have to respect that, right? Like, if a band is willing to let you bug them before or after a show to ask them some questions, the least we can do is just make them feel that they're listened to and that they feel as comfortable as possible.
I agree. I was just wondering where it came from, because I was like,
yeah.
Oh, okay. Anyways,
Yeah.
Aaliyah, back.
Can you tell us some of the stories from, you just got to go to a festival here in the States. You mentioned you have some funny stories, and I'm kind of interested in the cultural differences between shows and festivals in Canada, Europe, and the United States. So maybe that topic will give you the opportunity to share some of those stories.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, and so this was so I went to the Hell's Heroes Festival, which is in Austin, Texas. A festival I've been wanting to go to for forever. This is the first time I was able to go. For those of you that don't know the festival, it's really focused on like, traditional heavy metal, and it's kind of a combination of bands from the 80s and bands that are young that do their very best to look and sound as if they come straight out of the 80s. So headliners of the festival were Seraph Ungle, Riot, Dark Angel, and Candlemass. but a bunch of fun, newer bands like, Midnight was there, Night was there, Eternal Champion was there, Night Demon, like those kind of bands. Lady Beast, the band that I'm wearing a shirt of. And it was a lot of fun. There was a lot of people at the festival that I'd interviewed on the channel before, so it was just like great to hang out. I'll start with a fun anecdote, just to kind of show you what kind of fool I can be. And cultural differences play a part there. So the festival was done on, so it's Friday and Saturday. Friday night, we're done, and there's like a couple of us, some friends. We're like, we're pretty hungry. This festival has a lot to learn when it comes to logistics and food and that kind of stuff, but that's a different story. But at the end of the day, we were like, we're pretty hungry. It's only midnight or something like that. And so we find ourselves, we look up where can we have some food. We go to this diner that has still some food. In Houston, for those of you that are familiar with parts of Texas, that particular area, I'm going to say that 70% of people are Mexican or, Mexican roots, or maybe they just would consider Texas still part of Mexico, given its history. But anyway, so we are in this diner where they have to go find a waiter that actually can speak English to help us out. We're the only non-Mexican people that are having a fantastic party. We obviously stand out a little bit, given our regalia, but we're having fun, what have you. And after a couple of beers and some wings that we could still get, it's getting late, and I see that my phone is dying. And it feels like, oh, I've got 3% left on my battery. And I'm like, I have to get back to where I'm staying. I have no idea where I am. So I'm just Ubering. Great.
Right.
I memorized the license plate, and then my battery died. So I tell the people that I wasn't staying with them. So I tell like, hey, I don't know how long this Uber will take to get here, but I'm going to stand on the curb, to get this car. And I guess it's 2:00 by now. Uber comes by, get in, start driving, and I start to realize that, first of all, we're driving for a long time, and second, this doesn't look at all like the neighborhood that I'm staying in. And then I realized after the fact, or when the guy says like, yeah, you were here, that I must have typed in 42nd Street instead of 24th Street, something. And so I'm in the middle of nowhere. By now it's 2:30 or something like that. Like outskirts of Houston. A person does not want to let me, one doesn't want to take me somewhere else because he says that he has to pick up somebody else still. So I'm there, and then that shows you the cultural differences. That okay, I start walking, and like, and I go like, oh, there's still some houses like once in a while with like a light on. There's a dog barking here or there, and I go like, oh, should I just go knock on their door and ask if I can plug my phone in and call an Uber? Then I realize I'm in Texas and people will shoot me before I even hit the door. So yeah, that wasn't a smart idea. But long story short, also shows you that if you are a white male in your 30s, you have way less to worry about at night, because it was,
Well,
when I
yeah,
tell
because
the
my
story,
reaction as a woman would already be like,
you would
uh-oh.
probably never get out of that car, and neither should you.
No.
But my reaction was, all right, I'll just walk home. So I walked for over an hour. This is where one of the benefits of the American city like numbered street system that you sometimes have. Go like, well, if this is 42nd Street, the next one is 43rd. So I have to turn around, so I have to go walk that way. And I just hope that this will keep going until 24th Street, which eventually it did. I had to cross a few freeways. But eventually, like by like 3:30 or something like that, I stumbled back into the place that I had to be. So that was a great workout and
What
a
an
very
adventure.
sobering walk. So yeah, that was my big adventure that night. Doesn't really have anything to do with the festival, but yeah, these things happen, I guess.
So I want to kind of switch things up just a teeny bit here. So what are you taking any precautions when you go out to shows, or do you kind of like, other than your mask and you're already boosted?
Well, I mean, I'll bring a mask. Like I said, most of the time you've got like a drink in your hand, and so you don't always wear the mask.
All the
To be
time,
honest,
white.
well, like I'll like if there's I won't sometimes I'll bring my bring a little bottle of sanitizer for sure, but I find that a lot of the venues, especially in Toronto, will have a lot of sanitizer everywhere and what have you. So if I see like a machine, it's kind of like if I go to the store, like at the end of the store and oh, there's a machine, okay, yeah, I'll use it. That's the same like I go to my office for work, same thing. Not really any other I kind of had to tell myself, let's say, you know, when things were starting to open up a little bit, that because I was somebody that was living really trying to follow the restrictions as good as possible. But I also was like, okay, now that the restrictions are being lifted, I don't want to be that guy that in 5 years from now is still sitting in his basement going like, oh no, if I walk outside, you know, the world's going to kill me.
Yep.
Which doesn't mean that I don't take, you know, where we are today still very serious. Like we are not done with this whole thing, but I'm like, you know, at the end of the day, I'm boosted. And if they tell me like, hey, there's another booster in a few months, then I'll happily take that one. And if this becomes like a flu shot I take every year, great, no problem. I don't mind. If that means that I can go, you know, to some shows and have some fun, I'll happily do that. But yeah, I'm not gonna lick anybody's back or spit
Why
in
not?
somebody's face. You know, like that's only at a Guar show, maybe. I don't know, but yeah. So you know, I not really. I don't really take it. I mean, I should, you know, spend less time in a pit. I'm 37 and I'm still, you know, my ribs are still hurting from when I went to see Sepultura a couple of weeks ago. But you know, you remind yourself you're not too young, but not COVID specific, I would say. I mean, I do love the fact that the weather is getting better, and at the Houston Festival, the shows were inside, but a lot of the like the merch stands and like the food trucks and what have you, they were all outside on the lawn, and then that just feels nice, you know, that you can be out in the open air and just hang out with people. But yeah, I don't think I really answered your question, but
You
I'd say
sort of
like,
did.
yeah.
You sort of didn't. No, but that's fine. How about for like I know you said you generally are wearing a mask inside when you go to shows. What's been your experience with seeing like are the vast majority of people doing it? Like I know when I went to Under Oath a few weeks ago, and that was the first day the restrictions dropped. And me, I mean, I'm one of those people. I'm like, mask restrictions are off. I'm done. Good. I'm
Right.
not fine. Good. You know, I went with Lindsay. Lindsay wanted to wear a mask. Totally cool. Whatever. Bradley wanted to wear a mask. Totally cool. Me, I'm just like, whatever. But I noticed it was like about 50% of the people wearing masks. I'm just kind of curious what you've noticed.
Well, I mean, if you go to the States, you know, there's no masks. Like,
Yeah.
you know, it's funny because like, you know, so I took a flight from Toronto to Houston, and it's like I'd say that on that flight, 60% of people were wearing masks on the flight because that was with United Airlines, who was also stopped doing a mask mandate, which again, that was because a certain a certain judge made a certain ruling, and whether or not that is in the best interest of everybody, I'll leave that in the middle. I don't want to turn this into a political conversation, but you know, you get out of the airplane and you walk into the terminal in Houston, and it's like there's literally no masks anywhere. And then when I was on the flight back to Toronto, everybody on the flight had masks on. So it's funny how that cultural difference is definitely there. In shows in Toronto, I would say that yeah, like, you know, 50%, I guess. But in metal, here's the thing, you know, I actually went with a buddy last night to something that where I'm completely out of my element, went to like this big, massive glow party, like a club, 3,000 people. Like there were I saw maybe 20 masks out of 3,000 people. A metal show in the same venue I went to see Behemoth and Arch Enemy like 5 days ago. And then I would say it's like half the crowd. And I would say like, you know, in general, but we, the three of us, already know that metalheads tend to be much smarter and considerate people than everybody else. But anyway, yeah, no, I think it's gonna go down pretty quickly. Like I said, I think there are moments that I might always wear a mask, but maybe not in shows anymore. Once, you know, getting more comfortable, and once you know, we continue to see that, sure, infections still go up and down, but at the end of the day, our hospitalization is steadily going down in Canada, which is great. Yeah. So, and I think it's just like, you know, the moment you hear that first song and the moment you rush to the pit and the moment you have that first beer, you know, mentally you're back in 2018 and it feels like none of this has ever happened. So yeah, so I understand where you're coming from. It's also like, you know, I'll tell you, so my wife has never had COVID, and she's still quite, she's not looking forward to ever having that. Even though mine, you know, took me a week to get over it. I'm feeling pretty crappy. And we've got the space that I'm actually calling you from where I usually work, and this was turned into a basically downstairs apartment. So for a week, we lived in the same house without seeing each other. My wife also has some pre-existing conditions. She has asthma. So whenever I go to a show, I actually sleep separate from her. I don't bother. Also, I've had a few had a few beers maybe, and I don't want to wake her up at night. And then like in the morning, if I feel anything, we've got like a million home tests here, so I'll do a quick test to see like, hey, I feel fine, and it gives me a negative test. Okay, great. So then she feels better. So we do that for now. I don't think that's going to continue forever either, but we'll see.
I guess it depends. All right, Aaliyah.
So you mentioned the masking cultural difference, but what are some other cultural differences that you've noticed?
Besides COVID, yeah, let's leave
Yeah,
COVID
outside
behind.
of COVID.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there's first of all, I mean, there's just clear differences between regional and then global scenes and what have you. Not just from the way that a community acts, but labels that are important or not important, genres that are big or not, and then just there's so many American bands that focus exclusively on the American market. I mean, the United States has the luxury of, it is a big group of people, and you can have a professional career just focusing on one country. Even Elvis Presley never performed outside of the United States in his entire
What?
career.
How did I
Yep,
not realize that?
that's a fact.
I have to Google this. I believe you, but I don't believe you at the same time. While you're talking, I'm Googling.
All right, do that. That's at least what my father-in-law tells me. But I mean, it just there's bands that are massive in the States that no one has ever heard of in Europe, and sometimes people will come over and they try to push them. Like Skillet was a band like that, for example, that they 3 shows outside.
All in Canada: Toronto, Ottawa, and Vancouver.
Oh, there you go. There you
So
go.
never outside of North America.
Never outside of North America. But anyways, it happens at times that especially like think of a festival like Grass Pop. I go every year in Belgium. It's a big festival. It's like 50 to 80,000 people every day. And then regularly there's every edition there's like this 1 or 2 bands that will play at 2 o'clock on a main stage for a mostly empty field still, that are like bands like Skillet, who are huge, that would play arenas in the States, but it just nobody's even heard of them. They often come across with a package, it's like if when Five Finger Death Punch, which also is not as big in Europe as they are in the States, but they'll play a little later on the bill on a European festival. When they play, they usually bring 1 or 2 supporting bands on tour that are also quite well known. So that's just a thing. That's just a fact. Even today's globalized world, where bands successful through YouTube videos and everybody can see those views, it's still funny to see how it's still quite regional, and bands that are massive in Europe will play tiny venues here and vice versa. But yeah, there is definitely, I think it's maybe even more than geographical. I think it's almost like scene wise. There are certain scenes that are metal, and this is something that has fascinated me for as long as I've listened to this music, is metal in so many ways is both extremely progressive and accepting and inclusive, and at the same time also extremely conservative. And sometimes it's the same people that are both, and that blows my mind. I thought it was fantastic that when I saw in Hell's Heroes, I'm gonna say that 60 or 70% of the people there were not white, which I did not expect going into Texas. I think Texas, guns, cowboys, whatever. Now, a lot of the people there were Latino, and they're either regional, or a lot of people flew in from Mexico and other places. There were people from Europe. There were people from all over the world, which is great to see. But we also know that there's a ton of extremely conservative people in hard rock and metal, and that can be sometimes from a political perspective. That can also sometimes be from a gatekeeping perspective, something that we talked about in a previous conversation. Where it's metal bands are urged to be different, but if you're different, sorry, you're not real. It's that just very funny to me. But yeah, so I think that there are specific subgenres that are a little bit more open and inclusive than others. Extreme examples of that are that black metal community. I love black metal music. Black metal is not, or the scene is not known as being the most inclusive and the most open-minded, right? On a lot of different levels,
Sure.
not just the music. And then there's other genres that are very colorful and very accepting. But you know, overall, especially if you go to festivals and you see people, you know, different genres of metal being mixed and whatever, I think you usually see a very welcoming community. I'm just gonna pause there for a second because I've tendency to just keep talking and talking and talking. I want to make sure you can get some questions in.
It's cool. It's cool. You mentioned like the maybe regional differences in genre preference, sort of underlying. Can you
Sure.
explain what you have observed?
Yeah, I mean, what I was getting at was that, you know, like sometimes there's regional differences that you can tell. You know, if you're a Belgian living in Canada and go to the States, you can clearly see that people act differently in a certain way. But then there's also, you know, you can also always see that, you know, if people that like thrash metal might act a little bit different than people who like a different kind of metal. Although I think there's more and more, and I think that's a very good thing. I think there's more and more people like myself, and I know people like both of you that love stuff in everything. And I think that's always healthy. I think that's good. You know, like people that narrow themselves down to just one thing, that you're always missing out. And, you know, yeah, I think that's a shame. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely, you know, regional preferences for music for sure. There are certain genres of music or of metal that are, you know, more popular in certain areas, that whether they originated there or not, I'll leave that in the middle. But you know, like forever and ever and ever, in Canada, if you look at Canada, like, you know, Montreal has been known to be like a bastion for, you know, for death metal and for hardcore and more the extreme kind side of things. Where if you're looking at Western Canada, are there death metal bands in Western Canada? Absolutely. Are there hardcore bands in Western Canada? Absolutely. But if you're looking what's going on right now, there's a little bit more of a traditional metal, a lot of thrash metal as well, but melodic thrash metal. You know, and if you see like in Canada, Western Canada, a couple of new bands popping up, like Hyperia is a cool new band you should check out. You've got WMD, you've got Tymo, you've got a couple of names escape me right now, but there's really like a whole new scene bubbling up, and I think that a lot of bands in that area see the shining light of an Unleash the Archers that are like mixing a lot of traditional styles together and having some success. Striker, you know, in Edmonton, like those bands. It's a little bit more of a traditional feel, where everything that tends to get a lot of attention in Montreal, you know, if it's not crushing you from the moment you listen to it, it's not really part of the scene. Now, that being said, one of the most extreme bands in Canada, Archfire, is from Vancouver. So there's always these exceptions. But yeah, you can clearly tell like these regional changes. I mean, you see that same in the States as well, where there's certain areas that have usually, you know, kind of centered around a specific subgenre of metal. So yeah. I think it's fun to see. Like, I'm one of those guys that can just, you know, sit down with two of my buddies and we can just like talk forever about like the black metal scene from South France in the late 90s, you know, like, and then and now we're going to talk about the melodic death metal scene that was kind of at the same time as a counterweight coming out of Stockholm, but not the same melodic death metal scene as from Göteborg, you know, like you can get lost in those things. And the funny thing is that when you talk to the bands themselves, they don't give a shit, right? You know, there are very few bands that are serious bands that, you know, when you ask them the question, like, yeah, so would you consider yourself to be more like a neoclassical black and power metal, or are you more a, you know, melodic thrash? They just say like, we're just a metal band. You know, we're a
Yes.
rock band, you know, like, and that's so funny. Like I ask that question to a lot of bands especially when they're a little bit more unique or difficult to label. Labels are good. Labels help people like you and I to kind of find new bands, you know, based on what we already like, and it's good for the music labels to kind of promote something. But almost every single time that I ask somebody about, you know, the label that their music is getting, they just start to laugh and they go like, whatever, you know. A perfect example of that, because sometimes like it's also by the PR team, and maybe this is something that, you know, is funny for you guys because, you know, that's what you do. So I was talking the other day to Greg Wilkinson, who is the bass player of Autopsy and also with the singer of Autopsy, now released a new album under the name Static Abyss. And it's like a really fun, and it kind of like sounds like the bastard child between Autopsy and Discharge, like a crust punky kind of feel, but with like some old school death metal in there. And it was like, the PR message is like, yeah, great new Death Doom band. And it's like, so I asked Greg, like, this doesn't sound at all like Greg. And he's like, yeah, I don't know. That's just what the PR agency, labeled it. Whatever, we're good. So yeah, so it's funny how like people tend to spend so much time on trying to define something, and then when you actually go to the source, it really doesn't matter. But
Yeah, it's really only useful for marketing purposes.
yeah, no, for sure, for sure.
And that's kind of why I was asking about the regional genre preferences as well, because I think that maybe bands sometimes will think like, oh, my genre is not popular where I live, so I should do something different. But maybe they
Right.
should just expand their reach.
Yeah. I mean, on that, I think that at the end of the day, and that kind of goes back to anything you do in life, whether it is from a professional perspective or an artistic perspective, like if you're not doing something with passion and with, if you don't really, if you're not being true to yourself, it's gonna fail. I think. I mean, you might get success, and like there's examples enough of bands, not in metal, but definitely outside of metal and popular music, where people have gotten very successful with stuff that they, kind of had to do to be popular, but they might be they might get successful, but they're not, happy with that situation. I gave you the example last time when something like this came up of Nicole Scherzinger of the Pussycat Dolls. She, has a career as a model and a pop singer or R&B singer. She just wants to sing rock music, but that doesn't fit the image, so she can't. All right. She'd be probably way happier if she could just be in like, some sleazy rock band in Las Vegas and just, playing some music that way. But it is what it is. I mean, it's the same for what we're doing here. Like if we would be talking about this without really being passionate about it, people would notice straight away, I think. And that's, in the long run, that's what people will keep going back to. There's bands that come and go, but if you look today and like some of the bands that are still popular, that, again, back to that festival that I was at last weekend, Sirifungal, never made any impression really in the 80s when their classic albums came out and didn't really work. And it took a lot of people a long time to fully appreciate what they were doing because it was so different and so new and it didn't fit into anything that was going on. Their label at the time, well, not label because they did a lot of stuff independently, but people tried to push them with the Los Angeles scene, like the Slayers and the Megadeths and whatever. And they were not doing that at all. And now, 40 years later, people finally truly, appreciate them, and they're going to play Walk and they're going to play Grass Pub. They were headlining this festival. And when you talk to them, you see like this is, they got a little bit, they kind of gave up in the later 90s and they were gone for a while. It took a lot of convincing for them to finally come back. But then now they start seeing, how people that are born 20 years after they, for the first time, called it quits, are really so passionate about it. And you can see that fire back. And I think that in the long run, that's what's going to be remembered. Bands that do, or just in general, people that do something they're passionate about. I think that will always shine. Yeah, people gravitate towards that.
Yeah. Do we have time for one more topic, Curtis?
Yeah, we got about 6 minutes.
Okay. I wanted to ask, because you brought up doing interviews on site at the festival. Right. How that was what you were doing before the pandemic, was doing on-site interviews, and then you switched to doing Zoom interviews.
Well, I only started my my channel during the pandemic. So, okay. But I mean, I know it's right, yeah. A different way of approaching and handling and whatever. And I was able to talk to artists before COVID, but I never did it as part of a show. Now I'm doing it part of the show.
So what has been like the most, the differences between doing the digital interviews versus the in-person interviews? Do you have a preference?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, the preference is definitely in person to do that. I mean, it's a different energy, but it's also like when you go to a festival, you the bigger festivals, and you've got like there's a lot of red tape, and like up front which bands are you going to speak to at what time, and it's all like very organized. On a smaller festival like Cal's Heroes, where most of my interviews were done you know just kind of like very impromptu, when I know I had a little bit of a setup with me, and I was like, oh yeah, hey, um but Jason from Summerlands was just playing. He's hanging out here. He's grabbing a beer. Just going to respectfully ask if he wants to, answer a few questions. Okay, let's go find a place where there's not too much noise and just ask you some questions. So that's really fun because it's real. It's in the moment. I did not have the time. Like I definitely did not take like hours before this festival to prepare questions for all these bands if I potentially saw them. It was more like, oh, Henrik from Screamer, we had a beer earlier. Hey, do you want to answer some questions? And you just have to come up with them in the moment. When I do a Zoom interview, I'm prepared. Like I'm a perfectionist, and a lot of my stuff is still very DIY in my channel. I try to do everything myself, but my questions are prepared. Like I know what I'm going to ask. I know that I've got good questions, and artists really appreciate that you ask them questions. But it's also good when you can kind of riff off each other, and you say, okay, you say that, so that brings me to this point. When you're like at a festival, especially if it's 2 o'clock at night and you're both a little drunk, to come up in the moment with interesting questions. But when that works, that is really fun. So I definitely prefer that. Yeah, and you can really get the energy of the person, right? So it's fun. I would definitely prefer that. The downside is, even with all these shows coming back, not every show it's possible to do interviews, especially now still with COVID. And you just have, through the internet and Zoom, you have access to bands that never play your city. Like I'm lucky in Toronto, like, Toronto is a big city. So most bands that do a Canadian leg of a North American tour will play either in Toronto or somewhere in the suburbs. But, if not every band plays all the time. So there's bands that I've had the chance to interview that if I only did in-person interviews, I would never get to. I mean, I've done over 350 videos in a year and a half of my channel's existence. Of those 350, I'm going to say that 250 are interviews. Like, as much as I would love to, there's never going to be a year that I'm going to go to 250 shows in 1 year. Like, that's just not possible, right? So anyway, so there's pros and cons to both of them, but yeah, interviewing people in the moment is a lot of fun. I think it stands out more for the artists themselves.
Yeah. Curtis, do you want to ask any questions before?
No, I think anything I ask is just going to take us a lot longer.
That's Curtis being very nice in saying, like, this Jasper guy, he never stops. Like, ask him one thing and he just keeps going and going, which is true, which is very true.
So we just have to keep having you back.
I know I can keep asking more and more and more is more like the correct thing. So hey, we've had you on like 3 or 4 times. Of course, we like listening to you talk. So yeah. So we actually enjoy listening to you, Belgian Jasper. But yeah,
you can call me Jasper. Don't worry. It's just.
Whatever.
Belgian is your first name now.
Belgian's your
apparently, yeah. Some people do think that, which is, I find that hilarious. But anyway.
I want to have one final question now that I think of it, though. Now that I've been guilted into asking you a question, just kidding. No, but in seriousness, though. So, what do you think is the main difference, though, when you're interviewing in person, especially nowadays, than it would have been before? I realize, like you said, you haven't done them before, but like, what is the key, like in terms of like difference that you kind of think it is, like in person, if you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, well, I think it's more just the setting it up. Honestly, yeah. I think the interview itself, also, like, again, when it's at a festival and you see people, like, they're there already to have fun at that point. They're having a beer. They don't care too much anymore about the mask or not, and then being too close or not. But But even if it wasn't at a festival and it's before a show, they might want to, keep their distance because you have that whole financial burden of potentially, killing a tour. You don't want to do that. I was supposed to go interview and go to the show of Dragon Force and Visions of Atlantis, and I was going to go talk to Clemmy, and that was the week I got COVID. So
Oh,
I was like, hey, and it was like, okay, yeah, I tested COVID like 5 days ago and probably not going to, be contagious anymore. But nevertheless, I said, like, I am not putting that risk on this tour. Like, the last thing you want as a fan and somebody wants to support somebody, they're like, oh yeah, you gave COVID to somebody, doesn't even have to be an artist, but somebody or a roadie or whatever, and this whole thing is over. Like, I didn't want to have that on my conscience. But I mean, like I said, like, before COVID, I mean, I've like I said, I have interviewed people before. I've joined like friends that would have interviewed bands a long time ago for COVID, and it's more like, yeah, okay, you have to be on the list and roughly that time be there, and then when it's your turn, they call you in. Now it's like, okay, I'm still waiting on the exact details for tomorrow, like time wise, but like tomorrow morning, I have to go get an official COVID test that is within 24 hours of the interview. I have to confirm up front that I'm fully vaccinated. I have to show proof of that. Like, so there's just more red tape right now, and few bands are doing it at this point, right? Like, most bands are still kind of like, we're gonna not do
yeah.
it, but it's gonna come back, I'm sure. And something like what is not possible right now, really is, I did this one thing to try it out with Zach from Age of Athena. Really cool Toronto-based symphonic metal meets melodic death metal meets prog metal, like, cool band. Check him out.
We know that.
I did an interview with him, like, over beers at a local Toronto brewery, which I wanted to do. Like, we sampled beers while we asked questions, and it was a lot of fun format. That is not possible yet with visiting bands. With bands from Toronto, sure, who like don't like, for them it's like going to a bar, but that's a lot of risk to take at this point still. And so, like, I would say, like, just doing fun stuff that is not just a guy or a girl asking an artist some questions and getting responses. That's the maximum that you can do now. And for a fun interview, that's the minimum that you really want to do. Like, if somebody tells, like, hey, you've got a half hour with this person, it's like, okay, let's do something fun. Let's give you a Toronto experience. There's so many fun ideas that I have, but that's going to have to wait until we're I think a few more months, or maybe even a year down the road.
Fair enough. I do have one more thing. Thanks, guys. Now you guys got me talking here. So what do you think? What do you think it's going to take for the vast majority of people to get out of being scared to go to shows? Out of curiosity, I mean, let me rephrase that.
Yeah.
I think most people are afraid to go, but you know what I mean. Like, there's a segment of people that won't go.
Sure. Well, no, and again, in Canada and Europe, there's less people going today than in, for example, the United States, and that is, I think, because in general, I won't use the word reckless, as Aaliyah said, but I think in general, Europeans and Canadians tend to be a little bit more cautious and a little bit more careful. But I think it's just time. I really do think that. I think, over time, it's always like, okay, somebody knows that somebody knows somebody that's going to a show, and the next time I'm gonna go with, and then you have fun, and then you're gonna do it again, and then you're gonna take somebody else. And I think it just needs some time for, like, this was a massive event for the world. Like this rocked everything, and just hoping that overnight people will be like, okay, I'm done with that. Like, no, like, I think we're only gonna see, like, in 10 years time from now, when we look back, we're gonna really see the true impact. I'm not talking, economically and stuff like that, but on people, on their psyche, on, like, everybody had to deal with mental health issues the last 2 years. People that never thought they would be in that situation were facing some demons. I think one of the reasons why it was such a phenomenal time for heavy metal, like, I think so much great creativity has come out of the metal scene, and I know a lot of people that have much more embraced darker bands, more extreme bands that tend to talk or address these kinds of issues, but also, like, on kids, like, some kids were big enough to have to stay home at school, and that was different, and then they could go back, then have to stay home again. Young kids that the first 2 years of their life were guarded from everything, and might in a few years from now not automatically go and try and hug somebody, like all of that stuff is speculation at this point. I'm sure there's already a lot of research, but I think in a few years from now, when we look back, we'll actually understand how massive this impact has been on everybody. And so it's a big thing, and you can't just go like, okay, no more masks today. Okay, good. Oh, we can just do whatever we want. Like, I think that everybody deep down still has to come over that. And some people are there, great. Some people have been there, ready to go back to normal. And I think we just have to respect that some people are going to take a little bit longer time. As much as I would love everybody to go back and support these bands so that all these bands don't go bankrupt and labels don't, go bankrupt and all that kind of stuff. But, let's respect people's comfort levels, and then hopefully in a few years we'll be healthier.
Yeah, and let's do the things that we can do, staying comfortable, feeling safe, to support the bands that we love, whether that's going to shows or ordering your merch online or streaming their music, buying their music. There are other 100%. Ways to support bands that, if you're not.
I've definitely spent a lot more on merch and music in the last 2 years than I've ever done before. Like, I came home with like a whole boatload of merch from that festival. I've been ordering vinyl like crazy. Now, not everybody has the means for that. Obviously understand that, but I think it's good to see that specifically our scene, again, whether they're conservative or progressive, whether they're left or right, black or white, everybody really cares about this music, and just seeing everybody trying to do whatever they can to support. I've heard so many buddies of mine say like, I don't really like this band that much, but I want to support them, so I bind their vinyl, or stuff like that, and I think that's great. I don't think you see that in every subculture.
Yeah. And so with that, on that note, that's a great note to end it. And until next time, everyone, make like a bull and throw those horns up.
Awesome.